Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Josh. My last name is Newman, hence the channel name NWMN, which is really just the name that I go by as an artist and online in general. If you want to know like a little bit more about who I am, feel free to watch my first video, which is on my channel. I introduce myself there and give a decent bit about my background. With that being said though, in this video, I'll be covering the topic of psychedelics, all right? And more specifically, psychedelics in the relationship to spirituality and Christianity in particular. What I'll do is I'll give like a brief definition and history of psychedelics, but what this isn't going to be, it's not going to be like an incredibly in-depth video, but more of just an overview. And so I guess with that in mind, like why am I making this video in the first place? Well, I used to use psychedelics religiously in both senses of that word. Psychedelics were pretty much a part of my personality. They did profound things to my mind that I thought were beneficial, but the truth is that they did much more harm than good. And if you want to hear about my particular experiences on LSD and ecstasy that led me to converting to Christianity, I do explain it in depth in my first video. So anyway, like this video is made for a couple types of people. Maybe you currently use psychedelics and you just want to know a little bit more about them and their ties to spirituality. Maybe you used to use psychedelics and you're just interested in the topic, or maybe you haven't used them at all, but you keep seeing, I don't know, the topic pop up in culture and you just want to know more. Whatever the case may be, welcome to my channel and welcome to the video, and I am glad that you're here. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. I just started this channel so I can use all the help that I can get. It is very much appreciated. All right. Anyway, getting into it, I do think that this video is relevant. Before we start, let's define psychedelic. So Oxford Language defines psychedelic as relating to or denoting drugs, especially LSD, that produce hallucinations and apparent expansion of consciousness. So it follows then that psychedelic drugs are a class of substances that alter perception, cognition, and mood. Psychedelics, they produce intense experiences that can involve visual hallucinations, distorted perceptions of reality, changes in time and space, emotional intensification, altered sense of self, spiritual or mystical insights. I mean, they do a lot, right? And examples of psychedelic drugs, you've probably heard of some of these: LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, DMT, MDMA, and they're all different in some ways, but they're all kind of similar in some ways as well. There's other psychedelic substances, but those are a lot of the main ones that are usually referenced and used. So I can firsthand tell you that the list of effects that I just read to you they're completely accurate, all right? It's hard to overstate like how powerful the experiences that you have on psychedelics are. It's almost like trying to describe color to a blind person if you haven't taken the drugs yourself. I think a lot of people don't realize what they're getting into when they decide that they want to experiment. Psychedelics, they've been around for ages. I mean, in the Rig Veda, which is a collection of Hindu scriptures dated to around 1500 BC, there's mention of a supposedly divine substance called soma, which was used for ritualistic purposes. I mean, in the caves of Algeria, there's paintings dated back thousands of years that depict hallucinatory mushrooms, right? We also know that the Aztecs, the Mayans, and the Egyptians used psychedelics. They're nothing new. And they've almost always been tied to ritualistic practices. And now they're more and more becoming a cultural phenomenon. There's been a steady rise of psychedelic interest in this country. We're all familiar with the idea of hippie culture in the 1960s, right? Like psychedelics were part and parcel of that area, or of that era, excuse me. But recently, I think we've been seeing a resurgence. As we all know, weed has been mostly like decriminalized or legalized in the US. I'm not saying that weed is a full-blown psychedelic, because it isn't, but it does have some of those same properties, and it has warmed the cultural attitude towards other substances. I mean, shrooms immediately comes to mind. I'll link some articles down below that are interesting to read about this topic, but for instance, Colorado has already legalized the possession and use of hallucinatory mushrooms, even though it's still illegal under federal law. Interest has also grown over the years because of popular figures talking about them in depth. I mean, for instance, Joe Rogan, who literally has the largest podcast in the entire world, he's been very open about his experiences with psychedelics and their alleged benefits. When popular figures like that talk loudly and openly, especially positively, about something that has the same amount of intrigue as psychedelic drugs, there's certainly influence that comes from that. There's been lots of studies in recent years about the potential health benefits of psychedelics treating mental disorders such as like depression, anxiety, addiction, just to name a few, right? And I think that this is something that Christians will have to grapple with more and more in the future. What happens when psychedelics are prescribed by doctors? Like there's been talk about that for like mushrooms and MDMA, like for depression. They're already doing that with ketamine, which does have psychedelic properties, right? I mean, I think it's pretty much a meme now that Elon Musk uses ketamine. We've already seen it with marijuana, right? And I do believe that there are legitimate cases in which marijuana can be used in medicine. I'm not disputing that, but I've also seen its medicinal properties be used as a justification for recreation and abuse. I know personally, like lots of professing Christians who don't believe that marijuana usage is wrong at all. And I've seen this type of thinking infiltrate the church. Whether we want to admit it or not, all of our minds are shaped by culture to differing extents. We are formed by the environment around us, and cultural attitudes do shape our own attitudes, again, to differing extents. So going back to psychedelics specifically, like I said before, cultures have been using psychedelics for thousands of years. This is nothing new. These entheogenic substances were used primarily in spiritual and shamanic practices. An entheogen, by the way, it's defined as this: a chemical substance typically of plant origin that is ingested to produce a non-ordinary state of consciousness for religious or spiritual purposes. Now, if you're really interested in doing a deep dive, I've linked an article by the National Library of Medicine titled "The Ancient Roots of Today's Emerging Renaissance in Psychedelic Medicine." It's an interesting read. Now, what's also interesting to me is that word medicine. I feel like that word can mean so many different things to so many different people. Like, what are we talking about? Are we talking about medicine that heals a physical ailment, like aloe, however you say it, aloe on a sunburn? Are we talking about medicine that corrects like chemical imbalances in our brain? That's still physical, but in a different way. Are we talking about medicine that helps our emotional state, that simply makes us feel better? Again, this is often tied to like chemical imbalance in the brain, so this whole conversation gets really tricky pretty quickly. So like, what's an appropriate use of medicine and what's not? I think that it's an important conversation. There are so many people that legitimately believe that psychedelics are a worthwhile pursuit in the area of medicine, and I used to be one of those people wholeheartedly. I would talk to everybody about the benefits of psychedelics, even my parents. And honestly, there are some benefits that psychedelics can have, but I think that the negative consequences greatly outweigh any of the potential benefits. However, these negative consequences will rarely be acknowledged by a secularized society because the greatest consequences are spiritual. I think the danger of psychedelic drugs are talked about somewhat, but the dangers are secularized. You'll often hear that LSD and other substances like that can induce psychosis and can pretty much lead to people like losing their minds and going crazy. To me, it becomes like immediately apparent that that's a spiritual effect of a demonic kind. Also, spiritual consequences are often very confused with like spiritual insight as well, especially in New Age. When we use psychoactive and psychedelic drugs to treat emotional ailments, I feel like we start getting into like pretty evil territory really quickly. So with all this in mind, like, what's the biblical take on psychedelics? What does the Bible say about the use of drugs? Does it say anything at all about them? I think you might be surprised to learn the answer. Let's read just a couple of passages. So Deuteronomy 18, 9 through 12 says this: "When you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not learn to imitate the detestable ways of the nations there. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord." Exodus 22:18. "You shall not permit a sorceress to live." Leviticus 20:27. "A man or a woman who is a medium or a necromancer shall surely be put to death. They shall be stoned with stones, their blood shall be upon them." Okay, now you might be thinking, all right, Josh, like these verses are talking about witchcraft and sorcery. Like, how do psychedelics come into play? Well, it's interesting that you'd ask, so thank you for asking. The Greek word for sorcery that's used in the New Testament is pharmakeia. That's where we get our word for pharmacy. In biblical times, sorcery and witchcraft, it was very literally conducted through the use of mind-altering substances, specifically psychedelics. Pharmakeia is specifically referring to drugs. Using mind-altering substances for spiritual purposes, or really any purpose at all, is witchcraft, and it is sorcery. The cultures of this time would use these drugs to communicate with their false gods and gain access to the spiritual world. And look, like, the Bible clearly shows us that witchcraft and sorcery is real, and it clearly identifies entheogenic drugs as intimately tied to witchcraft and sorcery. God hates it. The punishment in the Old Testament for sorcery was death. That's how serious he says it is. Now, in a secularized society, witchcraft and sorcery are looked at as these like fantastical things, more akin to, like, I don't know, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings. And I'd say the average person in modern America at least doesn't really see them as real, and if they do, they just don't really think about it as really affecting their life in any big way. But I think that, like, the spiritual world is just so downplayed in our culture, and I don't think it should be. All throughout history, it's been seen as very real. The Bible says it's real, and this is something that people need to wake up to. If you're a Christian and you're on the edge about psychedelics and you're kind of interested, literally stop. You're messing with some seriously wicked stuff. You're opening yourself up to real powers that are much stronger than you are. If you think that you can handle psychedelics, then honestly, you're really ignorant. You need to be educated and you need to be humbled. Even if you've had a few good experiences, you have no idea how quickly things can turn and how quickly things become completely out of your control. Even if all of you have is good experiences, like, you're being influenced much more than you think you are. Again, you're opening yourself up to real spiritual powers that are much stronger than you are. Those powers want to destroy you. Ephesians 6:12 says this, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." There are real spiritual forces that we wage war against. The spiritual world that psychedelics opens you up to is a very real world. Another interesting point that is relevant is that the devil often disguises himself as an angel of light. Like, what a brilliant marketing strategy, really. Like, the devil wants to destroy you. How dumb would he be just to, like, tell you that, though? No, like, darkness comes to you and tells you that it's light. I believe that this is what's happening when people say that they've been helped so much through their use of psychedelics. I was actually recently in Orlando, and I was able to talk to a guy in his 30s that grew up in the church. He went to school, he went to seminary, and he's recently deconstructed, and he's moved into a more universalist direction. He ultimately denied the exclusivity of Christ and said that there were other ways to God, and interestingly enough, that he was made aware of this through the enlightenment he had gotten through the use of psychedelics. Isn't that interesting? Once you see this common thread, it's almost impossible to ignore, and I've seen this over and over. The whole hippie culture, just love, accept everybody. That spiritual, not religious framework, like, everybody is on their journey, everybody will make it eventually, that framework, right? It seems really pleasant on the surface. It seems loving, it seems kind, but at its root, it's evil and it's sinister. And it honestly goes back to the garden when the serpent said, "Did God really say?" Did God really say that there's only one way to God? Did Jesus really say that he's the way, the truth, and the life, and that no one comes to the Father except through him? Yes. Yes, he did. The spiritual influence that you will inevitably attain through the use of psychedelics is against Christ, and it's against God. Those are real spirits and real entities that you're interacting with. Those spirits will tell you, just like in the garden, that if you eat the fruit, you will not surely die. They'll tell you that if you reject Christ and turn to a more inclusive spirituality where everybody can do what they want, you won't surely die. Again, I see it over and over. It's the devil's oldest trick, and he's masterful at employing it. Psychedelics, they will indeed open your eyes to many things, and to your fallen human mind, they will seem spectacular. But the deeper that you explore and the more time that you spend in that world, the more you'll find death, and ultimately you will be destroyed if you don't turn away from it and towards Christ. and this really, it just scratches the surface of an incredibly interesting and important topic. This is something that I'll probably continue talking about to varying extents in the future. If you're interested in hearing about this more from a Christian perspective, then just go watch the first video that I posted on this page. I'll also link to an episode of one of my favorite podcasts, Haunted Cosmos, where they do a whole couple hour long episode dedicated to the topic of psychedelics. It's really great stuff. You're also more than welcome to DM me if you have any questions. My Instagram is linked on my page, and you can reach out to me there. I'd love to talk about it. And anyways, that's it for now. Not a super long video, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. And again, please like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this in the future. But that's it for now, and I'll see you guys later. Thanks.